So those of us who are old enough can remember the 1984 Olympic Games, and it had a huge impact on Australian cycling when Mike Turtur was part of the group that won the gold medal in Los Angeles and upset the Yanks on their home soil. I was in grade 4 at the time, and I did a school project on you and your teammates, and it's part of the reason I took up cycling. But that is just a small part of his legacy to the sport. He was the creator of this race. He was the man that put it on at the very beginning in 1999. He's had an enormous impact on cycling in Australia and globally. Put your hands together for Mike Turtur. A huge part of the race being successful was having a hometown hero. He came to the race as part of the big French team. It was the Garn team at the time, and there were big expectations, and he delivered. The winner of the first ever edition of the Tour Down Under, a huge round of applause for Stuart O'Grady. It was Credit Agricole. I've been corrected. That's one. One strike. 2 to go. And bringing credibility to the race and taking it to an international audience, there's only one man that you can hire to commentate on the race. He gave it instant credibility, and people wanted to come and watch it, and people wanted to come and ride it. He is the global voice of cycling. He's covered the Tour de France more than 50 times. He's covered every edition of the Tour Down Under. Who is it? Phil Liggett. I'm going to start with you, Mike. As a Victorian, you can have the Grand Prix back. The Tour Down Under's heaps better. When you lost the Grand Prix Adelaide, what was the process of creating this race?
Liberal government. John Olsen was the Premier and Joan Hall was the Minister. I think they made a great decision when we lost the Grand Prix because to try to replace the Grand Prix with one event was impossible because it was just too big. So what they did, they decided to get a number of events hopefully up and going, to, as a combination, return to the state the economic benefit of the Grand Prix. And it worked brilliantly because we got the Tour, the 500, the horse trials, they improved the arts, festivals. So it was a great decision by the government of the day back then to make that decision and allowed us as an organisation to get a budget together to put the race on.
Was there any point in the organisation period where you were doubting yourself and thinking, I could have a much easier, calmer life than this?
When I doubt myself, just every day, just about. It was the first race nearly killed me, really. It was pretty full on. We got through unscathed, and it was really important that the race went off without a hitch because dealing with the professional teams for the first time in Australia, I knew that if we didn't get it right, we're going to be in trouble. So thankfully it went well.
How important was it for you to have Phil Liggett come out? And he was essentially an ambassador for the race.
Well, of course, Phil, the voice of cycling, he was instrumental in the staging of the race and his support and his knowledge, and also the fact that he was moving around the races of the world, seeing the teams, talking to riders. So in the pre-race situation for us, it was really important to have people like Phil and Ron Webb, another great guy that was so important to us in the early years, to be over in Europe to tell our story.
And Phil, what were your expectations before the race got started? Mike spoke to you well before the race was announced.
I thought Mike Turtur, frankly, had gone mad because I knew Mike. I commentated on Mike when he won his gold medal in Los Angeles in '84, and then he's a pure trackman. I didn't think he knew anything about road racing. And he comes up in '97, I guess it would be, Mike, and said, we're going to make a big race, just like the Tour de France in Adelaide, where I'd never been. And he says, we're going to call it the Tour Down Under. I thought, well, that sounds pretty good. It's a pretty good title for an Australian race, isn't it? So he said that we want to bring you out the year before the planned date, which was '98, show you what our plan is. And when I came out, the whole of South Australia were just behind it. I said, Mike, you cannot lose. But what he was doing is facing the world of cycling. He's changing what has been a tradition since the late 1800s, and that's bringing the start of the season to the southern hemisphere. And so the result was everything fell into, as Mike said, it could have been the biggest disaster in the world of cycling or the biggest success. And it was the latter, Mike. and it was thanks to you and everybody behind you. Because you mentioned John Olsen, but we also saw that the police, they came to the Tour de France, they saw how we escorted the Tour de France, and they brought that skill back here. And like they do in every country, they were queuing up to be the guys that got on those motorbikes to escort the best bike riders in the world. The one thing I remember, Stu, was we started the first year, had the team's presentation in Rundle Mall, didn't we? And I remember standing with you, and you said, I can't believe this, because you're a native of Adelaide. He said, look at that. I said, look at what? Eric Zabel, the fastest sprinter in the world at the time, walking out in his racing gear with a bag full of toys for his kids back home in Germany, having to put them down to climb up onto the team presentation to salute the crowd. And it was a dream come true for people like Stuart. And to win the first year, I thought the whole thing was fixed. Well, yeah, what about Victor Harbour that day?
Stewie, how proud were you of South Australia when there was that moment and you saw Eric Zabel on your home roads? Normally you're on his roads.
Yeah, look, I can't say enough for it. I mean, I remember when Mike used to come home from Europe each October, November. We'd be living in Europe for 10 months, doing your trade, racing, and my family and friends had never really seen me race on the road. So when Mike came up with the idea of a Tour Down Under and a professional race in Adelaide, I also thought he was slightly mad, but I was happy to go along with it. And yeah, I mean, that first one was just such an epic moment for me personally. Back in the day, there was probably, you knew every bike rider out on the road, didn't you? You knew who was who, because they were the only silly ones riding around in Lycra. And to see the evolution has just been absolutely amazing. But yeah, that first one to see, for Mike to get Phil Liggett to come down, it just immediately brings that level of quality and acknowledgement and recognition. And then once we had Zabel and a few of the other guys come down, sure, it was hot, but it's better than the alternative, which is about -5 in Belgium.
I just want to take one step slightly backwards, and I spoke at the start about the role that Mike Turtur has played in Australian cycling. What about the role he's played in your career, in your life?
Mike was my first coach, funnily enough, back in the South Australian Sports Institute days. I remember him coming up and tapping me on the shoulder at Hanson Reserve and asking me to join SASI, and it's like I'd won the Olympics. It was a big moment in my life to be acknowledged by the... I had Mike Turtur's name on my pencil case at school. I've had the most respect for Mike, since I took up cycling. So for Mike to be my first coach, it's been a hell of a journey, and I'm just privileged and honoured to take over this role and try and fulfil his shoes, because he's left some bloody big boots. He knows that, but I'll say it again. I can't thank you enough, and the South Australian Tourism Commission and the government and all those people that created that first TDU and got behind it. I know my sister was alongside you, putting up with all your crap, and a few others as well. And there's a lot of loyal people over there which did all the hard work, volunteered their time. But, all those people built the foundations, and if it wasn't for their hard work, we wouldn't be sitting here today acknowledging and celebrating 25 years.
Okay, back to 1999. Did you feel the pressure to win?
Bloody oath. Look, I'd had a stage win and yellow jersey in 98, and I felt a kind of pressure, absolutely. But also knew that I was back home. I started training earlier that year. Started November the 1st. I used to have a month off. That went out the window as soon as the TDU was on the program. And I'll never forget starting training on November the 1st, which was a whole month earlier than my body was really wanting me to, but I wanted to try and get a result, I guess. I just wanted to win a stage, really. I didn't really think I'd be able to win the overall, but the stars aligned, and, on a attacking day down to Victor Harbour, everything went all right.
Mike, how important do you think it was to the growth of the race, then the next couple of years, that Stuart did win the first edition?
It was very important, because obviously being in the South Australian was an important aspect of the whole thing. But Stuart himself... really starting to do big things in Europe with the jerseys in the Tour. And then the other Australians, of course, Bradley McGee and then Robbie McEwen. There was a host, Michael Rogers. There was a heap of those guys that came from the track, transitioned to the road racing, and they were doing really well. So them participating here, then going back and talking about the race certainly helped.
Phil, Mike just mentioned guys like Michael Rogers. He won this race when he was part of the national team. Cadell Evans was in that team, I think, that year, or maybe the year before, and he won the King of the Mountains classification. As a commentator, this is a race that actually can set your season up as well, because you see a lot of neo-pros, first-year professionals for the first time. Who were some of the riders that you saw here for the first time, and you knew straight away, I'm going to be commentating about that rider for a decade or more?
There have been so many young super fines here in South Australia. The Aussies have won the race 14 times, and the rest have been won by various countries, but no country's ever won it more than twice, apart from Australia. And the thing is that because of the climate here, they'd stolen the march over the rest of Europe, who were freezing back home. But they were also proud people, and they realised that the Aussies were going to whack them if they didn't come here pretty fit. And they changed their attitude after that first race. They weren't going to lose too many. Next year, I think it was won by a Frenchman, I'm not sure, in the second year.
Gilles Magnon.
Gilles Magnon, that's right, his name's on the steps over there. And then that fellow O'Grady come and won again, which I thought were back to the status quo. But no, it wasn't to be. It's become a very competitive, very well-respected race, largely because the organisation is so good. And it's not just the people who are actually the administrators of the race, it's the government, the South Australian government. It's the police service who have done so well to keep this race so safe. All wanted success. For one reason, they didn't want South Australia to appear in a bad light to the world. Because as you know, there are two Australias. There's the mainland and there's South Australia. And never the twain shall meet. So they were very proud of what they created. And as I've often said around the world when I've commentated, it could not have failed. And it's got its own niche in the world now. It has changed the world of cycling. The season starts here now. It used to start in March in Belgium, but now it starts in Australia. It's become infectious. The whole calendar's been rewritten. Now we go across Asia before we ever get back to locate Belgium and France. It's a completely new world now.
Well, the big thing that you did, Mike, was create the hub and spoke scenario with everybody staying at the Hilton, and they go out for the stage and everybody comes back to the same spot. That didn't happen, Stewie, before this event. And now you look at all the races in the Middle East that are trying to take a hold. Tour of Oman, Tour of Qatar did it, the UAE. They are copying the Tour Down Under.
Yeah.
Oh, it's so unique. I mean, I was just walking around the last couple of days. It is the only race that I can think of that has the men's World Tour teams and the women's World Tour teams in the same hotel. So it's even great watching all them interact, because it's almost like an Olympic Games or World Championships. It's the only time you really get to mix and mingle. And, if you've had a little bit of a scuffle in the day, you can wander over to the table and maybe have it out with them in the dining hall. But no, it's a really unique scenario, and it's absolute genius from the start to have a central hub which kind of straight away just reduces all the travel. I mean, when you're on the road, they're away for 200 nights a year, and you're constantly living out of your suitcase. And that's the key to this success, is having the whole teams with a hub. The transfers can only be a maximum of 2 hours either way, in the morning and night. So, it's a training camp with the reward of all the races in the World Tour points.
Mike, there's been some big decisions that have been made to help this race grow, and getting big name riders down here has been part of that. What have been some of the key decisions you think you've made that have catapulted this race to the next level?
I think when we received World Tour status, we changed the race from predominantly a sprinter's race to a bit of an all-rounder. We introduced some hilltop finishes, and we had to do that because we wanted to attract more of those all-round types, and it worked really well. So the Wollonga finish, Corkscrew, Paracombe, they were terrific stages that set the race up, and they were really important. So we did change the style of the race after getting World Tour status.
And Stewie, we've spoken a little bit about some of the star riders that made their first appearance here, and I go back and I can remember watching, and you would have commentated on this, Phil, Alberto Contador winning the stage that went over Wollonga. He's won the Tour, the Vuelta, the Giro. He still talks about that victory as one of his most important. The first time we saw Peter Sagan was here, and he was in a breakaway on Wollonga Hill, with then world champion Cadel Evans, Alejandro Valverde, and Luis Leon Sanchez. Tadej Pogacar, his first World Tour race was here, and it's his worst ever result in a Tour, Mike. 13th in general classification. This race is too hard for Tadej.
Neil Stevens has pointed out two riders over all the years that I was involved in 22 races. First rider, he said, and he was managing the team, was Luis Sanchez. He said, this guy, he'll win. No one knew, and he won the race. Then, a few years back, went into the dining room and Neil grabbed me. He said, there's this guy, Pogacar. He's going to be a gun. And, history speaks for itself.
Can you imagine Tadej Pogacar walking through the Hilton right now? It would be chaos. What a star he's been. And Phil, in our roles in commentary, so often we're referring to what happened at the Tour Down Under when we're at the Tour de France.
Yes, absolutely right, because that's the thing about a journalist working on this race. We get to speak to the riders every day. We're in the same hotel, and we learn a lot about their lives for what is the upcoming season. On the Tour de France, I remember 2.5 weeks into the Tour de France, Robbie McEwen shouted at me and says, have I been on the race every day? I said, what are you talking about? Because we've never spoken. That's because I'm a day ahead of the riders. I never get to speak to the riders. As they cross the finishing line, I'm in the car, down to the finish 200 kilometres of the next day.
Now, I want to talk about your co-commentator for so long, the great Paul Sherwin. He was a magnificent ambassador for Adelaide and for this race. Did he ever discover where the best pie is in South Australia?
Every time Paul Sherwin arrived, he usually come from Uganda, where he basically lived. He got on well with the South African riders here because he spoke to them in Swahili rather than English when he was around, having a laugh with them, like Chris Froome, who used to talk to Chris in Swahili. And Paul loved pies. It's pretty much the first time he'd been to Australia when he came here. And he found the pie shop. And it took him approximately an hour to find his first pie shop when he touched down. But we also, at that time, we used to be guest driver on the tour and take the VIPs in our car, as well as do the race commentary. And we worked out how to get the sponsors in the car to pay for the pies. So we saved a lot of money as well on our per diems. And Paul would name every top pie shop in South Australia and would tell us before we got there what the pie was he was going to have.
He was also loved R.M. Williams, another great South Australian brand. And he loved his R.M. Williams boots so much that from Uganda, he sent his R.M. Williams boots to Adelaide for a friend to organise to get them fixed in a shoe shop in Adelaide. That guy then sent them to me in Melbourne. I then put them in my bag and took them to the Tour de France to give them to him. He loved those shoes.
Absolutely right, yes. And he forced me to buy them as well.
Going back to your time riding the race, Stewie, what's your proudest moment whilst riding the race?
That first Tour Down Under, like we keep repeating, we didn't really know which way it was going to go. I'd managed to get in the breakaway that day down to Glenelg in a big group. I think there was about 25 of us in that first breakaway, and we'd had it. I think we actually got it nearly to 2 minutes, and I thought, this is it. This is going to set up the race. But then Seiko actually just drilled it behind. They might have joined in with Onse, I can't remember, and started bringing it back. And I got really disappointed, thinking this is the moment. It's all gone. And then just as they came back, I thought it took off on a solo and just kind of threw everything at it, and it paid off. And I think that first victory for myself to put the victory salute in front of my family and friends and my South Australian public. I'm a pretty proud local. It was about as good as it gets.
I'm going to throw it open to questions from the floor. We can get a great question. We've got a pair of Oakley glasses to give away. But you're going to have to be brave enough to walk forward so I can hear the question and then relay it to these three and the rest of the audience. But I'm going to ask you another racing question. 2012, the Green Edge team has been launched, an Australian team backed by Jerry Ryan. You're the captain on the road and you deliver Simon Gerrans to victory. How satisfying was that?
Oh, it was absolutely massive. Gerro, we're a bit of a bunch of misfits at Green Edge. It was a mixture of super young talent and guys like Cookie, McEwen, myself, who we needed that to work, but we were struggling. We only just pulled off the national titles, saved ourselves from embarrassment. But Gero just absolutely delivered. And, to be fair, Simon saved our bacon a few times. We then went on to win Milan-San Remo. And look, for Green Edge, and again, saying a massive thank you to people like Jerry Ryan. Without his support, probably none of this would be possible and we wouldn't have our own Australian team. So Gero saved our bacon on quite a few occasions.
Jerry Ryan got inducted into the Australian Sports Hall of Fame recently. And at that dinner, there was a few of us trying to do the calculations how much money he's invested in Australian cycling. He first invested in Australian cycling with a $10,000 contribution to Kathy Watt's campaign at the Olympics for Barcelona. And we figured that he's probably invested somewhere close to $300 million in Australian cycling. Mike, where would we be without Jerry?
Oh, he saved the Australian Cycling Federation. They were bankrupt. Jerry Ryan, he supported the sport, and the team, of course, he saved the sport, really.
He has been absolutely huge. Anybody brave enough to come forward and ask a question? Okay, in your opinion, what's the coolest thing that's happened in this race since 1999?
Probably up there seeing Cadel Evans in the rainbow jersey attack up the corkscrew.
Is that cool enough for you, Molly? That's pretty cool. Mike?
Well, mentioning the rainbow jersey, we had it 5 times during my time. Five times.
5 world champions here.
Yes. So it's great to have the rainbow jersey on the start line, but when the rainbow jersey wins, it's another level. And when Sagan went into Uradla with both arms in the air, I just loved it. It was fantastic.
Phil, have you got one? Pretty hard to nail it down.
Well, it's probably the soup in the Hilton, actually. It's always pretty cool, isn't it? But as a rider, I love the appearance by Peter Sagan. He became quite a character here. He loved coming to Australia, and he always performed to the best of his ability, and he was always approachable. And I used to get a lot of people who would give me World Champions jerseys, and they always wanted Sagan to be the signatory. And I would go up to him in the Hilton and say, Peter, would you mind doing this? No, give me a pen. And he was always obliging. I like Peter very much. We're not entertained by him anymore. He still rides his bike, but he's back home now.
It was fantastic having him out here. Nate, have you got a question? How did you go about, this is a question for you, Mike, setting up a World Tour event? What is the step from going to being a UCI 2.1 race up to World Tour? What does that take? That's a big question.
Trying to elevate everything and make it bigger and better. Because when the World Tour teams, the big professional teams, and the riders come, they expect a certain quality, and the organisation have to deliver. So every aspect of the race we needed to improve, and we did. The Hilton with the food and the tour village and the setup and all of that sort of stuff was really important to the race. And also, as I said earlier, we changed the course. So we had to tweak it, make a little bit of an all-rounders race with some hilltop finishes and so on. So they were all important to the event.
I think that was the biggest decision. We've gone from Andre Greipel winning it twice, 18 stages, to all of a sudden, a sprinter like that can't win the race. And it completely changed the dynamic.
Well, Andre was brilliant for the race.
Amazing.
He's arriving, I think he arrived today.
Yes.
Or shortly. So he's a great ambassador for us and always was. He come up here many times and 18 stage wins is just phenomenal.
Huge. It's the record. Next question is coming from Simon Platt. Now, you might recognise the surname. It is Luke's dad, and he went to the National Championships last week wearing a T-shirt that said, "I'm Luke's dad." And then, as the two Lukes went across the finish line, he took that T-shirt off and he gave it to Luke Durbridge's dad. Put your hands together for Simon Platt. Okay, Tiff Cromwell mentioned it. She said that the arrival here of Lance Armstrong actually helped raise, regardless of what has happened since, Lance Armstrong coming here elevated the profile of the race. What do you believe that impact was?
I was one of the true believers. I freely admit that. I know I was wrong, but at the time I believed that he was something special. He had a licence that allowed him to race anywhere in the world when he came to Adelaide. And we knew from a marketing and promotion point of view that his presence here was going to be really important to the race. And every expectation we had for the event, and that is the public ride, which was the Challenge Tour in the old days, the Legends Night dinner, visitation, economic benefit. The smallest increase we had across the board in those areas was 100%. It was phenomenal. Like, it's just incredible. Armstrong made the people who were talking about it, thinking about it, to come to Adelaide and see the race. And then they went back and told their family and friends. And then when he stopped here in 2012, we sort of braced ourselves for about a 20% drop-off, and we had a 20% increase. It was phenomenal. It was a marketing coup of the century. You can say what you like. You can call me a dickhead. I was a dickhead, okay, like a lot of other people, but I believed. But his presence here took our race to the stratosphere.
It's kind of like there's an old quote from Oscar Wilde. He said, the only thing worse than people talking about you is people not talking about you. And when Armstrong came here, everybody was talking about this event.
Armstrong we had the great Eddie Merckx here, who's my personal idol in 2012. Eddie is really known within the sport of cycling. But Armstrong was known outside of the sport more so than any bike rider in the history of the sport. And then his work with cancer, raising funds, awareness, and all the other things he did, a lot of stuff across the board that helped a lot of people. So, look, we know the story, but he was here 3 times and he did wonders for the race.
And at that time, the story hadn't been revealed.
Correct, yes.
Anybody else with a question before? Yeah, we've got a question coming forward. Are you finally proud of what you've achieved with this event?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, it wasn't just me. I mean, I get a little bit uncomfortable because we have a lot of people over there who've worked on the race over the years. This race would never have happened if it wasn't for the commitment of the people working on the race. I mean, they just totally committed to delivering the race, and didn't matter how long it took, everyone did it. And we were a great team, and we delivered the race, and I'm enormously proud of what's been achieved, and so are those people too, because for me to try to name them all would be crazy, but they know who they are.
It's a long list. We've got another question. Okay, this is a really important question for each of you. How old were you when you took the safety wheels off your bike? She's 5. She's asking for a friend.
I can tell you, Mike was 45.
No, that's when I put them back on. I never had them, actually. In my time, there was no safety wheels.
Did you put training wheels on your kids' bikes, Stewie?
No, I think I got pushed down the hill.
What about your own kids?
No.
No.
No, the balance bike's the best because that actually does teach you how to lean and turn. A
lot of changes over the last 25 years. This is probably a Stewie question. Where do you see the race in the next 5 to 10 years?
Yeah, look, we're constantly looking at ways to improve the race, not only the race, but the festival, the size of the marquee, the shade, the associated events. I think what we did learn through COVID and that couple of years where we had to think outside the box is that we created a festival of cycling, and that's been a real ambition from myself and the team, is to create track racing, to have Tiff and Bowtree offer their gravel racing, to have paracycling, to have family. Of course, we had the family fun rides, but to trying to grow the festival side of the thing. I think the racing, I'm always looking at integrating new climbs, new towns, but it's pretty hard. Mike's covered most of them. Also, another really important thing is growing the women's cycling, which, this year we've managed to add our first women's one-day classic, which is a big thing. It's a big deal. So to have the growth of the women's cycling, as I heard Nettie say earlier, it's our strongest, best quality women's field we've ever had. We've got 10 women's World Tour teams. Look, the guys are always going to come down and rip it up. But the biggest growth I could see is for the women's cycling and the festival side of thing, and trying to keep all the fans happy.
All right, one more question before we wrap it up. Okay, throughout your careers, how did you recover from your biggest setbacks?
Well, I've had a couple of pretty big crashes. I think setbacks are part of they're part of life. But when you're trying to recover from a big crash, which a lot of cyclists go through, the most important thing is just to switch your mind into some kind of positive frame. And even when you're lying in a hospital bed, you know, you've got to get your mind working in a positive way and not be lying there thinking, oh man, this is going to hurt, or you know, there goes my season. You've got to try and straight away, you know, create a focus to get your body and mind turning over positive, and that's something I managed to do pretty well. Had a couple of big crashes, and you know, the power of the positive mind is probably the biggest thing.
Anything either of you would like to add to that? He reckons he's covered. Okay, one last question. Who is the best Aussie cyclist at the moment?
Mike doesn't know any Aussie cyclists, does he? No. I guess on the evidence of the World Championship, or National Championships rather, in Perth, I think Luke Plapp is looking pretty much up there at the moment. Well, Jay Vine won't agree, of course, or indeed...
if you had have asked the question a month ago, we'd say Grace Brown, because she hadn't retired yet. Everybody's pretty much on terms with Grace Brown. A round of applause over there. There's waves everywhere.
Yes.
Yeah, I think from a women's point of view, or an Australian cycling point of view, Grace has just blown everyone out the water. Olympic gold and World Championship time trial. For the men's side, it's hard to look past Ben O'Connor, second in the worlds. The ride he pulled off on the Volta was absolutely just mind-boggling. And then, you know, we've got all these other guys not far behind. Jay Vine's certainly got one of the biggest engines. You know, he's had a couple of really bad accidents. We've got Plappy, who's, you know, really dominating the nationals, and hopefully he can go on to bigger and better things in Europe. We've got, I mean, Australia always seems to bat above its average, and we've certainly got some incredible male and female riders coming through.
Exceptional. We've had Sarah Gigante finish 7th at the Tour de France last year. We've had Jai Hindley a couple of years ago win the Giro d'Italia. Caden Groves has won the points classification at the Volta. Australian cycling is in really good shape, and a lot of that is due to the contribution of these three men. Even though one of them's a Brit, we've claimed him as one of our own. Before we give them a round of applause to wish them well with the big week that is ahead, we've got to give away the glasses, and I'm basing it on the response that we got from Mike Turtur when he said, "That's a very important question." So we are giving the sunglasses to From Bendigo. Come on, Nate, with the red hat. Let's go. Put your hands together for the best question of the night, the Oakley sunglasses. Can you pass them down? We're going to step off stage. The team presentation is getting underway shortly. But before we do, one at a time, put your hands together for the man who created the race, Mike Turtur. The first ever winner of the race, Stuart O'Grady. And the man who took the race around the world with his voice, Phil Liggett.